Hello, 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 everyone. We are right at the hour, so we might as well start. We may have a few people trickling into the room, both the physical room and the virtual room, but thank you all for being here, whether you're physically here or virtually here. We really appreciate it. We're excited about the session. And we have a pretty packed program, so we're going to get started. So if anyone is confused, this is the session on the reproducibility interest groups, which is being reestablished. We'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing and how we got here, and then ask for your input about some of the things that we are thinking about doing, or have you suggest and propose your ideas. We're very, very keen on community input, and that includes everyone who's here, as well as anyone who could not attend and will be watching the recording later on. So we're really opening this up to the entire RDA community. So we have up on the slides the link and the QR code for the collaborative notes for the session, and we encourage you to open them, check it out, and add your thoughts and your comments. There are a couple of points during the next 90 minutes that will actually send you there. But even so, there's lots of useful links there, as well as opportunities to chime in. So how is it going to go today? We're going to do a little bit of introductions, give you a little bit of the history of the reproducibility interest group, talk about the interest group charter. We will have an invited panel of 4 distinguished guests who will speak to us about their work in other RDA groups and how they see the connections between what they do and what they focus on and reproducibility. And then we'll open it up to a discussion both on priorities of the interest group, types of activities that we can do that would be useful, and sort of the mechanisms of the group. We're, as I said, we're very keen for input, and we really, really want to make sure that this group is fulfilling the mission of RDA, in line with the mission of RDA, at the same time that it is promoting and advocating for reproducibility. So we want to make sure that the group adds value to your own work, as well as to the organization RDA as a whole. Okay, so that's generally how it's going to go today. So we'll start with some introductions. So we have, the interest group has 4 interim co-chairs, and we can talk a little bit later about what that means in terms of being interim. Lauren Codwallader, who's from PLOS, she's the Open Research Manager, and she's online. So hi, Lauren. Thank you for being our co-chair remotely today for the session. And Lauren will also be dropping in links in the Zoom for everyone who's remote, as well as managing all of the conversation that's going on online. Mandy Gooch is right here. Mandy's research data archivist at the Odum Institute at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Tom Honeyman from the Australian Research Data Commons, ARDC, is a solution architect. Tom unfortunately couldn't make it for this plenary, but is 100% one of us, co-chairs in all of his commitment and all of his efforts. And my name is Limor Peer. I'm at the Institution for Social and Policy Studies, as well as now the new data-intensive social science center at Yale University. So for those of you who are social scientists, we had a session about, or a meeting about getting people together around social science. So if that's an interest of yours, you can talk to me about that too. I want to acknowledge past co-chairs that we had for the reproducibility interest group, who are Bernard Schutz and Victoria Staden. So Bernard is director of the Data Innovation Research Institute and professor at the Gravity Exploration Institute at Cardiff University. Victoria Staden, I'm sure I don't have to mention her name to you all, associate professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at the University of Southern California. They had actually initiated and started the reproducibility group previously. and had led the efforts, the early efforts before the group sort of went on hiatus. So as it mentions in the slide here, the group was established in 2014, early days of RDA, right? So even, almost 10 years ago, there was a recognition. I don't know what plenary number that is, but it might be like 3 or 4. I don't know. There was a recognition that there's a role and a need to have a group organized around the topic of reproducibility. For various reasons, the group went into hiatus around 2019. I wanted just to give you a sense of the old group charter. What they set out to do at the time is to advance and enable reproducibility in research based on or producing data sets. And we'll get to what that means as well in a minute. And to provide community-based recommendations and infrastructure solutions, and doing so in coordination with other RDA working and interest groups where appropriate. And then to potentially spawn off also specific working groups or that can pilot recommendations, that could pilot solutions and so forth. So we got together, some of us who have been working either within RDA on reproducibility related topics, or are interested in the topic. The 4 co-chairs got together, and after the plenary, the last plenary in March of 2023. So during that plenary, Tom Honeyman and I, who is one of our co-chairs, put together a birds of a feather session on computational reproducibility, what's next for RDA. And the link is here and also in the collaborative notes if you want to see about what that session. Now, Tom and I put that together because both of us were among the co-chairs of the Cure Fair working group. Some of you may know that, which is now sort of finished its 18 months work and delivered. And Mandy, of course, was on as well, a co-chair. Delivered our deliverable, which was the 10 things for Cure Fair. So the idea there was, how do we curate research objects that need to be present, to be accessible and usable in order to reproduce research. And so the 10 Cure Fair things, if you're interested, you could check that out. But Tom and I put together this session to really gauge the interest of the community at RDA in establishing the reproducibility interest group and what that might look like. As a result of the session, I'll talk a little bit more about the actual session, but the short story is that in July of this past year, a few months ago, we reinstated and were recognized, endorsed by RDA to kind of restart the reproducibility interest group. We also changed the charter a little bit and got some community feedback and made sure to incorporate all of that input as well. So just really briefly, in addition to members of RDA in the room at the last plenary, we also wanted to start to build a bridge or start to make connections between the really wealth of information and really great work around reproducibility that is already happening out there. And so we invited some representatives from some very interesting initiatives and asked them to tell us a little bit about what they're doing. And the idea, again, was to kind of start building these bridges and see what can we learn about what's already going on, and start to really think about what can RDA, from its perspective, contribute to this landscape of all the efforts that are going on, and on the flip side, what can RDA gain from all of these efforts that are already happening. So we had representative from the Association of Computing Machinery, Philippe Bonnet, who's the chair of the Emerging Interest Group on Reproducibility. If you don't know too much about the reproducibility work that ACM is doing, I do urge you also to check it out. They were early with the idea of badging. They have a long tradition of what they're calling artifact review or artifact evaluation. And so in a lot of their conferences and journals, it's kind of a matter of normal routine practice that things get evaluated for reproducibility. Of course, they're computer science, so they focus more on the software and on the computer science side of things, and a little less on the data, although that's also changing. Etienne Roche talked about reproducibility networks. Obviously, the UK Reproducibility Network was a big pioneer, and we have other national initiatives popping up everywhere now, so it's great. Patricia Hertrich talked about the Turing Way. I'm sure you all know about the Turing Way's great work and their online resource for all things reproducibility. Alexandra Sarafuglo talked about open science communities, how to manage those in institutions and the connections to reproducibility. Lauren Codwalder, who's now one of our co-chairs, talked about PLUS, and she's the open research manager. She talked about efforts related to reproducibility, as well as a study that she led on code sharing. So that was very interesting. And we had Christophe Perignon from Cascade, the group that's in France, who's doing third-party verification services, mostly for sensitive data, but will contract with you to verify reproducibility. So the bottom line is that we figured that there's many external efforts going on already. There's also several RDA internal efforts that touch on various aspects of reproducibility. And that having a clear point of entry is how we're thinking of it into RDA activities around reproducibility would make it easier for these outsiders to know what's happening here around reproducibility, as well as kind of maybe be a portal in a way for RDA folks to know what's going out there. And so bottom line, let's reestablish the reproducibility interest group. So our main reason for being here is to advance and enable reproducibility in research based on or producing data sets that require code. So we're leading with the data. This is a particular way of looking at reproducibility. We'll get to the definition in a minute, but we do want to emphasize that data is a component here. There are other scenarios and other contexts where data is less important, as I mentioned, but here we are talking about data, and we are talking about some kind of code, some kind of computerized situation that has to happen in order to be able to reproduce things. And as we all know, we're using code and software and scripts now to read data, to open data, to clean data, to collect data, and obviously analyze data, and so forth. So our goal is to build bridges with the many RDA external efforts that address reproducibility in coordination with other RDA working and interest groups where appropriate. We also said in our charter that we are more than open to having working groups that could develop recommendations and solutions, kind of echoing the previous iteration of this group. Most of you, I'm sure, know that interest groups are a little different than working groups. We're kind of at a higher level, maybe more kind of a forum for discussion, and more of maybe a sponsor of specific actions around specific topics. So the interest group itself is not looking to test solutions or make recommendations that are more specific, but we are very interested in anyone who has the passion and the interest in doing something like that to talk to us, because there are opportunities to do so. So the definition of reproducibility, we are following the Turing Way's definition. I think that there's more and more convergence in kind of the general landscape on this. Where we went through a period of a little bit of confusion, and there were papers and projects just to try to define what reproducibility is. And all that work kind of, I think, now led us to a place where there's pretty much consensus that when we are talking about reproducibility, it could be considered or named computational reproducibility. But what we're really talking about is the ability or using the same data, using the same analysis or the same code to get the same results. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about reproducibility here. Clearly, there are other important types of activities and concepts that we want to hold in our mind. Replicable, is the research replicable? Can you do it with different data and get similar results in other contexts? Is it robust? Can you do it if you analyze it in a different way? Do you get the same or similar results? Generalizable, can we, just take that question and study it in different ways and reach the same conclusions? So these, I don't know if I can, does that work? Yeah. So the replicable, these three, I think we sort of think about these three as basically what science does, or what scholarship is. That's the work of the researchers. Reproducible, while also the work of the researchers, is a little bit different because it's more technical, and that's kind of the space that we are thinking of for this interest group. So we have 3 objectives. I'll go through them pretty quickly. So the first one is really for the interest group to provide a forum for discussion for RDA developments around data and code that relate to reproducibility. So a forum for discussion. We came up with a few topics that we thought are among the things that we could explore. They're not necessarily all sort of equal in weight, and maybe there might be other ones. Some of them might drop off a little bit if there's less of an interest by the community. But definitions of reproducibility, the value, limitation, and applicability of reproducibility is kind of the main issue. The first issue that we were thinking this group could hold conversations about. And again, it's not so much the what is reproducibility. I think we sort of settled that question, but I think it's maybe more what are the boundaries around that? When can we say that something is reproducible using the definition we just talked about? When is it not? What are the conditions for knowing if something is reproducible? So questions along those kind of elements are is one kind of discussion we could have or would like to have. The issue of persistent linking and the availability of both data and code, really important. So we've got data sharing. We have increasingly now maybe code sharing. We want to make sure these things are linked in order to be able to reproduce, and that they're linked to a publication that reports findings based on the data and the code. And I know there's work at RDA on all of this, and there's different approaches. There's an approach that focuses more on like PIDs for these things. There's approaches that talk about more like wrapping or containerizing these things. So that's another kind of area. The third topic, development, encouragement, and adoption of metadata standards for data and code. And I think we have some folks in the room who might talk about that, but I know, for example, Dan is in the room, his group working on metadata for software. We have a whole metadata interest group at RDA. So again, making sure that these activities and efforts are linked and with kind of an eye toward reproducibility and what it means in that context. And then practices around data and code publication, authorship, and citation. Again, kind of like in the context of reproducibility. So those are some of the topics that we think the interest group could talk about. We will later ask you what you think we need to focus on. So keep these in mind. And I'm sure you all have like other things that pop up in your mind that you're thinking, well, what about this? Or so keep those in mind or put them down in the collaborative notes as we speak. Okay, so the second objective, to identify and discuss the development and adoption of relevant tools, workflows, and computational infrastructure. So this is basically all the things that kind of can support reproducibility. Identify and discuss the development. This is maybe a question for the community too, is here, do we want to just have visibility into all these things that are happening? Do we want to be able to comment on them or in any way evaluate or participate? How do we want to sort of handle that? But I think the general objective, as we said it, is basically the kind of level of identifying and discussing, making sure that we are aware of these kind of developments. And the third one we were thinking for our interest group is to develop a research agenda that, so to really take this kind of to a level where we're talking about the reliability and the credibility of the scientific record. How can we reduce irreproducibility, and how all that could be informed by advances, the challenges, all of these things, taking into account the developments that we have in the landscape around FAIR principles, open science, research assessment, meta science, artificial intelligence, just a lot of stuff that is happening, and how would that kind of interact with what we're trying to do. So maybe just really quickly pause if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to throw in now, before we move to our panel and hear from some other RDA groups. And as I said, we will have time for a discussion at the end to elicit more of your research. But yeah, we have a question or comment.
Thanks so much.
Anita Novak, Elsevier. Great that you're restarting this working group. If you could go 2 slides back. No, sorry. Yeah, this one. So the first one is clear. The second, third, and fourth seem to assume that linking data and code increases reproducibility, first of all, which I think is important to investigate, because there are lots of ways in which data and code can be linked, and the article is entirely irreproducible. So I think it's important to split those two. And so keep it as a hypothesis, but have it maybe something that somebody can investigate. And secondly, I'm really missing every aspect of non-computational research infrastructures, equipment, methods, protocols, these types of things. The whole idea of putting your hypothesis out there before you do the measurement, the idea of lining up units of measurement, lots of things, metadata for equipment settings that are hugely move reproducibility forward. So it seems to me very computational research heavy, which is great, but I really think if I would love to participate in a group that has also a focus on equipments, methodology, protocols, etc., reporting standards, those types of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an excellent point. And I don't think that was intentional. I think that we are more inclusive in that way. I do think that we would absolutely welcome and think that all those areas are important. As well as culture, we didn't really talk about that, so there's a lot of things that have to happen in addition to the computational focus. So that's for sure. And then to your first point about linking, absolutely. I mean, that's like a minimum, we think, but clearly even if you can link things and even you can access them, you don't necessarily have reproducibility. So, right. Yeah. Dan.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick points, and I guess I'm going to kind of say I agree with Anita's point. So I'm going to agree with Anita's point, but also then kind of go back to the computational part and say that I don't think what's up here really is even complete for that. So when we say code, I don't know why we have code instead of software. Our code is just the lines of programming, but software is the more inclusive thing that includes containers, executables, and other parts. So I'd like to kind of urge we go from code to software and be more inclusive there. And then also, what about things like machine learning models, right, which aren't either data or code? There's something else. So, right, notebooks. So I feel like this is kind of, sorry, I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think this could have been written 10 years ago, exactly the same, but we're not 10 years ago now. I think kind of the way people do things changed then.
That's great. Great feedback. Thank you, Dan. And, that is how we articulated it for the charter. But I don't think that that prevents us from moving into, new terminology, new language, and adapting as we go, because that's going to change as well. And so absolutely, I agree. And I think you're right. Data and code is sort of like basically kind of shorthand for all of these things, but it might not represent the full picture. And as far as, so we would love to work with you, for example, on how we might want to rephrase that and what are some of the missing pieces for the group. So, yeah.
Hi, Limmer. Veerle van den Einde from KU Leuven. We've met in the past in different setups, but anyway, what I want to indicate is we're part of a Horizon Europe project, OSIRIS, which looks at reproducibility, and there's actually 3 Horizon Europe projects ongoing at the moment, looking at reproducibility and investigating what works, what doesn't work, which interventions have been tested and have not been tested. So the other 2 projects are Tier 2 and IRISE, and as 3 projects, we're working very much and closely together. So I think the idea is that we can definitely also contribute, and that whatever comes out of the projects can be highly valuable for this.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. And I'll mention that if you could add that in the collaborative notes, and if anyone else knows of other initiatives, that would be one of the questions we might want to talk about later, is how can we kind of keep track of all of these things and make sure that we reach out and that they're on the radar. Because yes, I'm aware of OSIRIS, and we, there's a lot of great energy behind these topics.
So I think we could do one more
question. And I don't have the online in front of me, but I'll check while we're. Yeah.
Thank you. I was to come back to the definition of reproducibility, because from my point of view, it's not clear what we mean by same result. For example, if I take something which is really reproducible, for example, I just measure the time in which a body takes to fall down. I will have a very different measurement because of uncertainty. And in all scientific applications, you have uncertainty. So how do you deal with uncertainty, theory of a measurement, and reproducibility, which is also computational reproducibility, because if you change the architecture of the processor or the version of the compiler, things may change. It will be the same result in some sense, but not exactly the same.
That's right.
And so I think if we push too far, we go to metrology theory, and I don't think it's the goal of the working group, but I think we should be more precise on the sense of same.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the uncertainty is a very important issue, and I think that it will also vary by the research method, the discipline. So there might have to be some adjustment depending on what it is that you're trying to measure and how you're measuring it, and and what uncertainty you're willing to accept. So I know in the social sciences, where I do most of my work, where if someone gives me a I don't know, a chi-square, some statistic, if the data is static and the software hasn't changed, and the code is the code, I should be able to get that exact result using these, right? So maybe my tolerance for uncertainty will be lower in some cases, but I think that that's a really important question, and it's one of the things I think this group could talk about, and I think would be useful because there are differences. All right, so I think we are going to transition to the second part of our presentation or talk today, and Mandy's going to take over for that.
Thank you. I'd like to invite up our wonderful panelists. Yes, would it be possible to get Neil, our Zoom, up on the main screen, please? Thank you. So first, let me introduce our four panelists. These are our representatives from various RDA. Hi, Neil. From various RDA interest groups and working groups. So we have joining us virtually is Neil Chu Hong, who is a representative from the Software Source Code Interest Group. We have with us Emma Crott from the Evaluation of Research Interest Group. We have Rebecca Cascella from the Metadata Interest Group, and then Susanna Assunta Sansone, who is from the Fair Sharing Working Group. So thank you all very much for joining us, and let me hopefully, okay. So you all can't see these questions. I apologize. We provided a few questions for our panelists that we're going to kind of do sort of a not super formal conversation discussion, all related to reproducibility. So I would like to start with our first question. So from your perspectives as representatives from your various groups, what do you think is the biggest hurdle to reproducibility? It's a really big question, so feel free.
I might jump in first just off the back of the previous comments that were made. So from the perspective of the Evaluation of Research Interest Group, I think it's pretty clear that there's limited incentives for reproducibility, and that would be something that we'd be interested in discussing with this interest group around what kind of forms of assessment would you like to see to encourage reproducibility, I guess. Another aspect of that that I'm sure a lot of people in this room would be aware of is funding models don't necessarily encourage reproducibility. Funders are concerned with the new, exciting, innovative research. They're not necessarily interested in reproducing that research. So they would be two sort of aspects that would be relevant from our perspective.
Thank you.
So from the metadata interest group, it won't come as a surprise that we think the lack of rich metadata for digital assets, and this would include not just the data, but the workflow, the software and equipment, everything that's been discussed so far.
I can certainly echo what Rebecca just said. It's the lack of richness, but also the wealth of very specific, domain-specific metadata standard that makes also complicated to apply them. Although beside wearing the working group hat, I want to also bring my own experience. I'm also part of one of tier 2, one of this European projects. And I think a big hurdle that we've realized is that the notion of reproducibility, it's really very different in the different disciplines. And I'm using other people's knowledge here because I'm learning about the topic too. So Sabina Leonelli calls this epistemology diversity, which really it's a big challenge because we need to understand that. We need to understand the difference in the aims, in the knowledge production, in the level of control the researcher have in the different research environment to be really able to understand the type of reproducibility we can reach. A very simple example that she really use is exploratory project, exploratory research. You can expect a very low level of reproducibility in clinical study, in clinical trial. You expect a very high one. So understanding what the community requires, it's also very important to put the target at the right level.
Yeah, those subtle nuances,
Yeah.
they make it really difficult. You're right, definitely. Neil.
Yeah, I'm basically going to agree with all of the other panelists and add in for software at the end of that as well. It's persuading researchers that the benefit is worth the cost when you're doing this for software, that we don't have the high quality empirical evidence for many of the interventions that we are suggesting and saying will improve reproducibility, which hinders people from adopting reproducibility if they're skeptical, and that the use of software in general isn't well described. And I think particularly when we're looking at software, there's such a variety of software used across fields, and within fields, the long tail of software is such that it becomes very hard to do this in a way where we're doing just single recommendations. So I think it's about about trying to improve practices in general rather than having the ability to have like a one size fits all recommendation.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, some echo there. I apologize. So I just would like to also remind everyone, so we will have some time after this to open it up for questions and discussion too. So I apologize for not saying that at the beginning, but thank you all very much for your perspective. So sort of tying into what you have just said here, it sort of flows naturally into our second one. So, we were talking about like this difficulty with incentivizing reproducibility, funding, getting funder input support for reproducibility, and then all of the different complexities with different domains and different softwares and whatnot for like what counts as reproducible. So those are a lot of difficulties, but so what is going well, do you think, in your areas when it comes to reproducibility? So what's working?
I was only going to go first again, only because it's probably off the back of Neil's comment. So something I wanted to highlight more from my perspective at the Australian Research Data Commons is my colleague Tom Honeyman has been working with his global counterparts to advocate for software as a first-class research output. And so in terms of the evaluation of research, that advocacy work that's being done and that understanding of software and data, but particularly Tom's work on software as a research output in its own right is important for progressing with the evaluation of research agenda. So that would be one point I'd make. The other that was mentioned earlier, I recognize that PIDS is not the full story, but it definitely the uptake of PIDs, persistent identifiers, and that ability to connect between people, data, software, and publications is definitely it provides a step towards reproducibility and being able to evaluate that in different contexts. So,
thank you.
I can go next. Well, in terms of what's going well, generically, I mean, we know that reproducibility started in the psychology area, in the clinical medicine, and then was a crisis, but now it's a reform, now it's an opportunity. And even the fact that the European Commission funded 3 projects, which to my knowledge are the first funded big activity, and we have all these reproducibility networks. They start in the UK, and now there is a lot of them in Europe and national level. I think it shows that the community, it's really moving, it's working behind. And I can say, if I can say a few words about the Tier 2, for example, project, that's, by the way, it's led by Tony Ross Allower, who's from Austria here, but it's not at the meeting. One of the things we are doing that project is this co-creation activity, understanding the status of the practice of the tools in the area, and then looking at these epistemological and social and technical challenges. And the idea of working with the publisher and the funder, it's a target for this project, because if you look at the pyramids, the strategy of cultural change of NOSEC, you have the reward and incentives are at the top. And this is why these 2 stakeholders are really very important to try to activate and motivate the community. So hopefully these are all positive things which are happening.
Yes, thank you.
So from the metadata interest group point of view, just the increased awareness of the importance of metadata. I mean, the FAIR principles obviously made that quite clear. Another thing that I think has been helping is the metadata standards catalog that was produced by the interest group, or actually from the working group that was spun off from the interest group, which is both human readable and machine readable, to make people aware of what metadata standards are out there and how to use them. And the current project of metadata elements, which are not attributes, but more complex objects, are being taken up, but they point out all the different information that is necessary for reproducibility.
Wonderful. Thank you. Neil.
Yeah, I mean, echoing what the other panelists have said, I think the main thing has been the rise in the raising of the profile of software as a kind of equal citizen with other types of research outputs. And so things like the FAIR principles for research software have helped people to understand how they might describe software through the good use of metadata, the software citation principles, and more importantly, the guidance and the tooling and the infrastructure around that has made it easier for people to give credit for software. And whilst that doesn't directly support reproducibility, it makes people much more likely to engage with it and support it. And things like software heritage, which is a way of preserving and archiving software, means that you can now do things which are helping people to use as a general practice, mentioning the sorts of software that they're using in their experiments. One last thing I'd like to say on this is that as we've gone forward, this is sort of more outside of RDA, but in the general practices that people are using, I think the increased use of sort of automated build systems for building software has made it easier to capture the kind of structured information on how software is configured and used, which really helps support what we put in the FAIR principles for research software. And I think if people continue to use that, then it will help improve reproducibility practices.
Yes, and just to let everyone know, in the collaborative notes, you will find links to all of their working groups and interest groups, so you can see a lot of these outputs that they have been mentioning here. I highly recommend, if you haven't checked them out yet, please go. So the final question for this panel is, I think, sort of a good segue into our last segment of our session as well. But what is one practical, realistic change you'd like to see made to support reproducibility? And I know that's like a really big question. So
You can go first.
No. I'll go first, but it's not one.
okay, that's fine.
Maybe it's one paper. Okay, so
exactly, it's a big question.
I'm going to cite again Tony Holloway's work, and it's a paper in PLOS Biology this year. So I'll find the reference unless Lauren already had the reference in the chat. And he has a nice table with the priority for the reproducibility reform, which really resonates also what you have as objective of the group, you know. So frame it as an opportunity, frame it as a reform, because again, the narrative, it's really very important. Consider this epistemic diversity, because that will really impact on any community adoption and community understanding that's valuable to them. And then really systematize, collect the evidence that reproducibility practices are efficient, are valuable, and then collaborate to boost the capacity. Final, he also mentioned minimize unintended consequences. And it's also very useful to refer to the European Union 2020 report. Is called Reproducibility of Research of Scientific Results. It's a scoping result that really says that developing policy that support community at different level of maturity is essential, not only for advanced discipline and country, but for all of them, because there will be country, obviously, which will be a disadvantage to try to put practice in action.
Thank you.
I don't know how realistic my comment is, but I mean, obviously trying to include reproducibility in research assessment practice would be ideal. I don't know if that goes to your question about practical and realistic change, but one thing that we're interested in is speaking to this interest group around what aspects of reproducibility you think can, you know, actually be assessed and included as an indicator of research integrity. My only comment around that would also be, we're very concerned with culture change. So I think that would be a big driver that we'd need to work on. But yeah, trying to get some kind of global assessment framework is probably not a realistic or practical. Yeah,
But small steps.
yeah.
We'll move there.
So similar to what's been said, I think that, or the group thinks that actually publishing data being counted as a scholarly output. And I know there's movement towards this, but it needs to go faster and actually happen.
Yes. Thank you. Neil.
So this is my own kind of personal opinion rather than the software source code interest group's opinion. And it's based on a study that myself and Michelle Barker are running to look at improving reproducibility in research performing organizations. So I was going to say that the one thing that's come out of that study that might help but might not be practical is using the increased fear around the misuse of AI in the publication of results to drive requirements to show provenance of experiments to secure publication, and also to instill the need for training for researchers to really understand the basic practices to interrogate published results. But I'm not sure that's practical or realistic. So I think I'm going to go with incentives, because my kind of overall perspective is that we've concentrated quite a lot on the tools and infrastructure layer of the NOZEC culture change pyramid. And I think what we need to look at now is the communities kind of incentives and policies, because I think those are not the top of the pyramid. They're equal pillars to the others. And if we can include reproducibility practices slowly in things like hiring and promotion criteria, annual review, peer review, and in funding guidelines, then we're more likely to get that change happening, because it incentivizes people to start doing things that improve reproducibility.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Okay, we are coming up on the time. So thank you all very much to all of our panelists. I would love to give a round of applause for their help here and their lovely contributions. And we do have time for questions for our panelists. So if anyone has any questions on any of the topics that we have covered, please raise your hand and we will have a microphone. Please definitely use the microphone so our online attendees can hear.
Hi, Katrina McCallum from Wiley. It's great this group is taking off again. But as all the panels have said, there's so much interrelated, interconnecting work that I'm just wondering if the group, by limiting its remit to data with code, is actually losing an opportunity to sort of coordinate and sort of globally coordinate activity around reproducibility of data and code, including data with code, rather than making it narrow, because so many of the issues are the same. There are particular things related to software, but there are also particular things related to particular types of data sets or particular disciplines that we could carve it out into lots and lots of reproducibility mini disciplines. But actually what the RDA would be fantastic at doing is sort of coordinating the types of different work under that remit and including all the stuff that the panelists have said. So it's just a suggestion that I think there's a bigger opportunity even than what you've got.
Thank you so much. Yes, that is a fantastic suggestion. Lee Moore is writing notes copiously. I can see her in the corner. I'm sure Lauren is also writing some copious notes. And yes, and our charter here, it is, laid out and everybody can read it, but it doesn't mean that it's static. We can, of course, move and adapt as necessary as the landscape, dictates and requires, which clearly our reproducibility landscape is very vast and changing constantly. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks. I love the proposal on assessment. I do think that in past attempts to assess or measure reproducibility, there's been a jump made. For instance, the reproducibility badges just say there is code with this paper, or the code has been checked. For the vast majority of experimental science, again, that is, not at all making the paper reproducible. It may be a small step, but I think in the past, the badging culture and such have jumped to conclusions about, for instance, the presence of data or the presence of code, and then taking that as a proxy for reproducibility. If this group could focus on actual experiments, for instance, that involve deeper and richer measures of reproducibility, that would be incredibly interesting. Or just collecting what's been done in a single place, saying this indeed improves reproducibility. Again, I'm harping on simply use units of measure, things like that. Give your temperatures, all these things that have to do with equipment and protocols and such. It would be great just to keep that within scope. Thanks.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's any comments or thoughts.
I guess one comment I'd make on that, I absolutely agree. One of the issues with research assessment and evaluation of research is that we use these indicators that are not perfect, and therefore there is this, it's just it's not actually reproducing the research. It's just a measure of if you could potentially do that. One thing I would keep in mind is we're always overburdening referees and assessors. And so we have to have a balance, I guess, in whether we use something as an indicator or a marker but versus whether we actually have placed too much burden on the assessors to actually go deep into the. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can you use the microphone, please?
Oh, sorry.
And
Maybe this is a topic for a working group. In fact,
yeah.
Assessment of reproducibility.
Yes.
Okay, and then I see we have a hand raised from Lauren and also from Neil. So Lauren, if you want to go really quickly. Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to echo the point as well about the issues with assessing the reproducibility from a publisher's point of view. We get the research at quite a late stage, so actually one of the only kind of pragmatic things researchers can do is check the presence of the data and the software that it runs. Going back to try and repeat experiments at that point is going to set the I guess that research back and the dissemination of it even further, which no one really wants to happen, right?
Thank you.
I think, there's a pragmatic part towards reproducibility as well that we need to be aware of.
And Neil.
Yeah, I'm going to be echoing some of that. Firstly, I think an assessment of reproducibility working group sounds like a great idea. And I think one of the things that we should be careful of there, given the work that we're seeing through, I'm involved in the Fair Impact project, which is looking at fair software data and other types of metrics, is that you should be abstracting the way that the thing that you're measuring from what you're seeing as the kind of the compliance criteria or levels, because we'll see those change, and we want to set those deliberately low to start off with, to ensure that people gradually build up this practice. But if we don't understand what it is we're looking for to assess and how we're assessing it, then we don't have that first step. So I think it sounds like a great idea for a working group, and I do hope that it splits off the what people should aspire to at any one stage from what people are assessing.
Thank you. And we have another question here. So I think we'll take this last question and then we'll move into the next section.
Okay, I guess I have just a comment on Anita's comment, which is that I've been doing artifact evaluation on conferences for a couple of years now, and there's 3 different levels of badges that are given, right? One for the artifacts being available, one for the artifacts being usable, and one for the work being reproduced. So I feel like we do have options there, and people can ask for different levels depending on what they want, and they may not always get everything they want.
Hmm.
So I think that the testing actually, in some cases, is the work actually reproducible?
Is the computational work reproducible? Yes. Right. Which that's not all science.
No.
Right.
These conferences.
Right. Get it. But then it gets ported to other sciences without much further consideration. Yeah. And of course, in computer science with Sigma and all, you have actual people who really go and reproduce papers, which is brilliant and is a great culture change. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for your lovely questions and suggestions. And thank you once again to our fantastic panelists, our representatives from various groups here at RDA. So another round of applause for all of you. Thank you. So could we please change it back to the slide deck? Oh, wow, you guys are amazing. Thank you. So we are going to go ahead and move into our next section. And I'm going to hand it over to Limor again and remove myself from the spotlight.
Okay, so next I think we started to go there, but we do have a way to capture some of your ideas for the reproducibility group on Slido. So if you go to slido.com or just use the QR code, you have the code there, and we have some questions, or we have a question for you, and you are able to put in your thoughts. I noticed that a few people already added their ideas, and you are able to up or down vote so that we can kind of get a measure of how you're thinking about it. So we're going to actually share in real time what's going on. If we can let Lauren share her screen, then Lauren will be able to show us what's coming in, and we can all take a look at it together. So give us a moment while we try to make that happen. If for some reason you're having trouble with Slido or prefer not to do it that way, there's also a place in the collaborative notes where you can add your thoughts on that.
Slido has a very small character limit.
A small character limit, yeah. So especially if you wanted to elaborate. In the collaborative notes, if you look at the content, you'll see, or the table of contents, question number 1 is another place where you can put in this kind of information. Oh, good, great, we've got it. So Lauren, you have thank you for managing the Slido situation behind the scenes. Maybe if you wanted to let us know what you're seeing coming in, and maybe like talk through some of the topics that have come up that maybe we haven't heard yet, would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we've got a few suggestions coming in and some upvoting going on, which is great because that helps us prioritize. So this is an ever-changing scene, so I'll try and do my best to see which ones are at the top at the moment. I think, and if you're on the Slido, it also suggests scrolling down because there are lots of things coming in that can be upvoted as needed. So the kind of top things are looking at, I guess, culture change and evaluation, as we've already kind of talked about a bit at the panel so far today. So how can we measure reproducibility, and what are the potential costs and benefits? It'll be good to talk about that a bit in the discussion. Do we mean costs and benefits of measuring the reproducibility, and who is absorbing those costs? And the need for culture change and incentives around reproducibility as well, I think ties nicely into that. So why are we measuring that reproducibility? Is it around rewarding researchers? How do we best go do that? How do we use those measurements to kind of speed up and advance culture change as well? I think would be a really interesting thing to discuss. Kind of moving down the list. Guidelines around when reproducibility is important, and I think that's actually a really interesting point. Actually, do we need to make sure everything is reproducible? I don't know why I'm a co-chair of a group where I can't say one of the main words of that group. Do we need to make sure everything is reproducible, or is there some kind of hierarchy, I guess, around research that we need to put more effort into certain types to make sure that's reproducible, or do we want to try and make sure everything is reproducible, and kind of what does that mean about the costs and resourcing around that research and the support needed to do that. And I guess there's the other point that this comment makes about, you know, should we be looking at doing new research or going back to doing trying to reproduce older research. So we've got more about incentives. Some people are really keen on computational reproducibility, and we can discuss, I guess, afterwards about what precisely kind of the different areas they might be thinking of there. Kind of lower down the list, but still able to get your votes. Again, stuff around incentives and kind of actually what that might look like in terms of checking reproducibility. Oh, this, I guess, oh, there we go, it's gone up the list. Qualitative research and reproducibility. What does that look like in those disciplines? Perhaps one for Limor that she might be especially interested in. Kind of clear definitions of reproducibility. But I think that's an interesting topic, and it goes to back, I think, what Susanna was talking about, how there are different kind of norms within different communities as well. So it might be that actually we need to think about grouping communities, or maybe having kind of smaller, perhaps working groups looking at specific areas to try and really delve into the issues of reproducibility at kind of lower levels. This one's a question I really like, so I should upvote it. And that's like how can we show that enhancing reproducibility improves research integrity, right? So if if we're putting a lot of this effort in, we're driving culture change to make incentives around it, like how do we actually know that that all this reproducibility and effort towards it is actually making a difference towards research and the research that is going out there? I think that's a really great question. Incorporating the reproducibility networks into the interest group. I think that's great, and they should definitely be on our list of outside organizations. Expanding the charter. I think, we've talked about this in some of the questions. Concrete actions to raise awareness. I think these are all really great things, and actually in the discussion, I think we want to talk about things to focus on next, and kind of next steps for the group, and some of that might include working groups that can look at things like taking concrete actions and really producing those guidelines, or those kind of more tangible outputs that I guess we're more used to from RDA and from the working groups. Lab protocols, it's something at PLOS that we're always thinking about and trying to push forward. So yeah, I think this is a great one. They've taken up more what can be done to make that easier. That's an integral part of reproducibility as well. Oh, who foots the bill has just popped up. Getting upvoted. Yeah, I think yeah, so we're getting kind of themes out around research evaluation. How do we measure that? Where is the burden of that placed in terms of who foots the bill, who does the work, who trains up the researchers to look at reproducibility? Like, why is this all important? How can we evidence that reproducibility is making a difference? Actually, what do we mean by reproducibility in the different disciplines, and guidelines around that, especially including qualitative research, which I think is often kind of forgotten. I'm going to go back up to the top now. Yeah, so I think they're the kind of main outcomes, and then some kind of perhaps some topics that are more concrete suggestions for potential working groups and things going forward. Sorry, I'm probably scrolling too fast for everyone. I'll go back down. Do we want to open it up for a discussion around that, Limor? And I'll keep kind of throwing out suggestions of areas to talk about.
I think so, yeah. If anyone else is getting dizzy, let me know. Just but all good. I mean, fantastic suggestions. Thank you very much for the input. I can say that one thing that we plan to do after today is collate all of this information, everything that's in the notes as well, and summarize, to inform our next steps and what we're going to do, but also to share with all of you all this wonderful input. I mean, there's definitely some things here that I wasn't really thinking about, and so this is very illuminating. And thank you for voting up or down, because that also helps us to kind of see any emerging maybe consensus or prioritization, which is part of what we want to do. So I think, it looks right now like the top kind of two main areas that have popped up are measuring reproducibility and the potential costs and benefits. And I'm assuming the potential costs and benefits of reproducibility itself, not the measurement. Yes. And the culture change and incentives. So I think that those two are, we hear them loud and clear, and then all of the other suggestions as well. And I think some of them also overlap, and definitely we will do a lot of synthesis work to try to get all of your feedback here to inform what we do. So I guess at this point we can kind of move back to the collaborative notes, or back to the slides where we have the collaborative notes link. If you don't have it already, you can open it there. And in the collaborative notes, there's the last section, or one before last, which is the community discussion and interaction. There's opportunities to add more information there in terms of the question that we just raised, which is, what would you like to see the reproducibility interest group focus on? There's a bonus question in that question 1 in the table, which is, how do you see the interest group adding value to your work, whether it's your work at RDA as one of the groups here, or your work, that you do, your day job. So for example, Emma mentioned reproducibility as a component of assessment. I love that. And I think there's consensus in the room here emerging that would be very useful and something that we can all benefit from, really. So I think, on that question too, if you think about your particular role as a stakeholder in the research, ecosystem, whether you're a publisher, a researcher, infrastructure provider, and so forth, what would you wake up one morning and say, thank goodness RDA provided me with this thing? If a thought pops up into your mind about that, in terms of like, what would be really valuable as an output from this group, please add that into that table. So that would be the table in question 1. So I think for the general discussion, I would love to hear people's thoughts on what we just saw kind of come through in Slido, or in the collaborative notes, and any other ideas that you might have before we maybe transition a little bit more to the working of the working group, of the interest group, and how we kind of manage the next phase. So let's just kind of open it up right now for a discussion. I think I'm aware that we have several people representing the publisher or publishing sector, and I would love to hear from you kind of more about your thoughts, maybe to kind of start. I think we heard a little bit about that already, but if anyone wants to pick that up, or from any other perspective. We can just have
question right now. Are we still filling things in? Are you going to look at that, or do you just want to know?
I think we can move to an open discussion, and people are still filling in, and we check with that as well. But yeah.
Yes. Just a question. all these URL have popped in earlier.
We will make them available. Yeah. Sorry, all the links that were mentioned in the chat or the people mentioned in their talks, we will capture all of that and add those to the collaborative notes for sure. Yes.
Hi, I'm Chris Hunter here from GigaScience, just sort of speaking up as one of the publishers. So at GigaScience, we have a very big focus on reproducibility already, and we spend a lot of time encouraging our authors to provide absolutely everything that is required for transparency and reproducibility. So we do put all these links in, and it does, I mean, I guess we're unique in the field in that we spend so much time doing this. And it does come down to the amount of time and money that we have to do it, because we've got the curators in-house to be able to do it. And I don't think any other journal has that availability of curators in-house, which makes it easier for us, but then we're still footing the bill for that at the moment. So sort of at some point, there's got to be a payoff as to why we're doing this. And obviously the way it's working at the moment with the whole sort of industry as well, the impact factor is still king, despite what people think. So it's not ideal, but in order to increase that impact factor, we're trying to do the best we can with the science and the reproducibility and transparency, in the hope that eventually we'll have the reputation of that and that people will come to us willingly with that information up front, so we don't have to put as much time in to do it. So it's sort of looking to the future to hope that that the practices catch up with what we're doing already. But I don't know if that's echoed across other publishing houses or anything, but it's sort of the way that we're moving at the moment, and it's working for us, I think. Time will tell.
Mandy, you might actually have a thought about that.
Yes, so I work at the Odum Institute at UNC out of Chapel Hill, and we oversee and manage the journal verification data policy for AJPS, the American Journal of Political Science, and for SPPQ, the State Politics and Policy Quarterly journal. So we do third-party data verification for their accepted manuscripts. And so it's kind of external to the actual journals themselves, but we work very closely with the editors and the managing editors, and they make sure that all of their conditionally accepted manuscripts, that all of the materials required to reproduce those materials or reproduce the results from those manuscripts are submitted to us, and we perform curation checks and verification checks. And so there is a cost involved in that, obviously. And so the journals themselves are footing that bill. There hasn't been an impact to their impact factor negatively that I know of. No, it's completely separate. Yeah, it's completely separate. But yeah, so it's a somewhat similar model. Like, we're not in-house. I do know that there are some other political science journals that do in-house verification. I think Political Analysis has their own people. I know in economics, Lars Vilhuber, he oversees an in-house verification service as well, using himself and a grad student and a slew of undergrads who do the verifications. So there are different models, but there is a cost involved in all of those. So that does get back to the question of who's footing this bill.
Can I just piggyback on that too?
Yes.
In addition to the cost, I mean, I just think like there are various models that exist out there. There, like in-house, third parties. In the case of what Lars Vilhuber is doing he's doing it on behalf of the Scholarly Association, the American Economics Association. And so I think there's that could also be a direction for the interest group to just sort of try to tease out how is that being done? Where is that work being done? Is it done at the point where, by the journal, at the point where things are submitted? Can it be done earlier, and by whom? The university? And if it is, can you get some kind of certification by the time it gets to the journal that it's already been verified? So I think the cost question, but also like when in the research life cycle does this happen, and who is going to do it is an interesting question. Yeah.
Yes. So to come back to the cost, also to speak to something that Lauren raised earlier, which speaks to the same issue. By the time you get to publishing the work, it's too late for any of this. So even though publishers might be doing some of this stuff, If it's not done before, it's never going to work. And so I think it's not just looking at where the work's being done, but actually who should be doing the work and where should that work be done, and who takes ownerships and responsibilities, and then how that cost and who pays for it and supports for it, because it benefits publishers to have higher quality submissions, if you like, or reproducibility. So that there's all of that. The other issue is just, I mean, I was at PLOS for 14 years when we set up research integrity groups there. I was at Hindawi, now at Wiley. The incentive system, I'm just going to speak to that because what we're doing here, there's a group here and all people are working on best practice. The reality out there is the incentive system is disrupting this massively, and we can see it within paper mills, but we also see a deep lack of understanding by researchers, both about what data they should be sharing, but what about reproducibility means. All of this is a huge amount of work to be done. And there's a lot of blame within the landscape about where the responsibility is. And I think, echoing Susanna's work, that we should see this as an opportunity to change and to reform and sort of get rid of that polarization and work together. And I would love to see this interest group helping to coordinate work between funders and publishers and institutions as well. And speaking to what Neil, I thought, just last comment, what Neil was talking about, the idea of assessment, linking assessment and measures to what we do, and also Anita was speaking that, but not setting the goals and the targets at such an ideal place that it becomes almost insurmountable, especially for smaller scholars publishers to do it, almost having a roadmap where, let's get on the road. Let's, we're at different stages. How can we support those who, only are putting up PDFs, let alone thinking about data sharing?
Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. Just following up on that, Katriana, Amy Nernberger, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, speaking on behalf of the Evaluation of Research Interest Group. So I want to make sure, I think it's important for this group, absolutely, reproducibility, important part of research assessment, but also limiting the scope of the work, because we really want this group to be a contributor to the evaluation of research. So when we start hearing about, yes, we absolutely need to take a look at the incentive system entirely, and reproducibility is part of that. And we are acting as a coordinating group and the evaluation of research group, where all of these other groups from RDA are filling in. So taking that into account as part of how this group thinks about scoping what their work is going to be.
No, great comment. Yeah, I think scoping is important. We need to work together, but we also need to kind of carve it out a little bit so we're not overlapping, duplicating. Yeah. Yes.
Just to the point of funding, which is an excellent point. I mean, similarly, we have in-house editors who read the entire protocol before they even think of publishing a clinical trial, right? So incredible amounts of work happening at the publishers, but also at many other data repositories and other places. Last week I was in Frankfurt, and on Monday there was an afternoon put together by Crossref that mostly dealt with research integrity, and there was kind of a feeling around the room that the publishers, at least, but also other stakeholders, should really at this point rally together. And the phrase that was bandied about was Plan R. So if you all know what Plan S is, it kind of completely changed the European landscape for open access publishing. If it were possible to have a similar initiative at a high level, say the EU, that says we need action that is involving all stakeholders, that is around research integrity. But I absolutely believe a firm case can be made that improving reproducibility will also improve research integrity, that we can, by insisting on well-structured reproducible papers, bad actors will not get through. There's a lot of concern about that. There's a lot of money in that, therefore. So I do think that connection is important. And the last connection I wanted to make, tomorrow I'll be back in Holland, and it's the founding of the Dutch Reproducibility Network. And of course, in the UK, Marcus Manalfo has founded a very, very active network. I do think it's good, if there are no members here of those networks, to reach out to them. You're in it, of course. I'm sorry.
And I
Didn't
think we
mean to
have
say it
a
right.
member from the
You wanna
German
talk about it?
reproducibility network in the room
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a segue what you're just saying. Also, tier 2 Osiris and Iris, given this is true for any other topic. For FAIR, there's so many FAIR projects, obviously, but the question is how we can really logistically even collaborate, because obviously we have some funds and money, manpower to do something, and we have already, Katrina knows she's on the advisory board for for tier 2. We already have a workshop with the publisher and with the funder to do some pilots. So it will be fantastic to make sure we connect so that we build on each other work, share things, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So interesting to understand the logistics of doing that.
We can talk about that. Yes.
I just wanted to actually stress Anita's point about the link between reproducibility, research integrity,
Thank you,
and
yes.
open science. And if that could
Yes.
be in the charter as well, very, very explicitly, transparency is the underlying,
That's right.
the underlying piece, and verifiability. And
Yeah, and I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, Plan R is not for reproducibility per se, right? It's like, okay. Yeah. But no, the link, I mean, absolutely. Transparency is at the base of all of this. The aim is integrity, credibility. That's where we're headed. I also want to mention, I'm sure most of you know about the Open Research Funders Group. Okay, so the efforts that they are making around open science, open research are great. It's led by Greg Tannenbaum. Erin Kiernan is on there as their community manager, and they do fantastic work. So that's, I think also will be helping with that culture change that we're talking about, and also with bringing together the stakeholders and having like the funders focused on it and the journals focused on it. I think will put some squeeze on the universities potentially to actually step up and participate in that whole process. But yeah, Dane.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking, listening, that the reproducibility network is, I think, the only thing that we've talked about, unless I've missed something, that's not really focused on the idea that research kind of ends when it's published, and that's the point at which we are going to worry about reproducibility. And so I guess I'm wondering, is that assumption right, that somehow that publishing is really the core, I don't know, the core point at which we're talking? Or is there something, or are there other paths at which reproducibility could come in addition?
So do you mean that past the publication point, or do you mean?
I guess I really meant even before the publication point, or I don't know. I guess we're making the assumption, I think we do this all the time, that that there's a very standard model of which people do work and they publish it, and then that's the end. And so I'm just wondering, does that make sense for reproducibility? Is the point at which we check reproducibility always the point of publication? Is there work that gets done that doesn't get published that we should check reproducibility? Should we check it before? Should we?
Yeah. And yeah, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to that. I think you're right. I think there's plenty of places it should be included, and we should encourage that. I think the only reason that publishing is the focus is because that's the point that gets measured most easily. That's the only reason it's there. But yeah, putting it somewhere else and having a measurement for it would be brilliant.
I mean, how good would it be if reproducibility was on the radar at the point where you're writing your plan, maybe a data management plan, right? Like all from the beginning to your infrastructure provider to your, I don't know if it's going to be tested, but it's going to be part of the process, explicitly. That could be addressed at different points then, because you could potentially measure, okay, I've set up this computational environment. This is how I'm going to do it. Are you already thinking about reproducibility at that point?
So I think the paper that Marcus Manafo put out in 2018, a manifesto for reproducibility, is really good at describing all the stages. He has a huge focus on education and research culture, as well as curators and funders. Those are different roles, obviously, but I think that's a really good start. And maybe it would be helpful if this working group somewhere we put, a small list of pivotal papers together, because
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take one more comment and then I think we'll go into the next section because we have like 5 minutes left.
Another issue I think that we should the group should be explicit about is the consequences of the inequity of the system, which makes reproducibility in low and middle income countries much harder, and also sometimes the incentive pressures are also just off the scale, and that has to be factored in. And also, just speaking to sort of Marcus Manafo's idea of education, another point I've put this in the document is how do we start to do capacity building appropriately around reproducibility and research integrity in different areas. So maybe a regional approach as well to reproducibility would help. It's very much a luxury to be able to replicate results, and it's a global Northwestern luxury.
Thank you. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Before we kind of talk about the last point we wanted to bring up, I'm going to bring Lauren back in just to say, because I haven't entirely been managing the chat, but there might be comments or questions that have come up from our virtual audience or people on Zoom. Lauren, if you want to unmute and just let us know if there's comments there that you'd like to share.
There's not been too many comments that we kind of haven't heard in the room. There's been lots of links shared, so we'll make sure that those are in the shared document as well. There's been kind of some reference to other sessions at RDA. So one in the digital humanities session yesterday that was thinking about publishing workflow data, so kind of highlighting other things that have been going on at RDA this week that's relevant to the session. So we can all go back and watch that if we weren't there yesterday. Some kind of conversations around kind of non-traditional publishing routes and self-publishing, you know, how reproducibility might fit into the kind of more self-publishing aspects. You know, think about preprints or other methods of self-publishing. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, not too many comments, but lots of links to different things.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So we are coming up to the end. I wanted to have a little bit of time, but I don't think we'll be able to do it right here, right now, just to talk about your preferences in terms of how we engage with the community. I guess by way of summary, which is hard to do because there's so much, my head is spinning, but yes, that's exactly what we wanted to get today. So I'm really, really pleased with that. But I think there's a stakeholder question and the collaboration among the stakeholders in this space that I think is going to be playing a role. And I don't know if we want to necessarily divide the work of the interest group around those things, or kind of thinking about how to bring everyone together. But that's something I think we're going to be thinking about. There are particular domains or topics or, you know, specifics that we might want to bring into play as well. I think some of the suggestions that came up about incentives, suggestions about assessment will definitely take into account as we move forward. You know, in terms of specific topics, we mentioned a little bit, machine learning came up, AI came up. I think that is going to be a challenge for reproducibility that we might want to kind of go next. Trust and integrity obviously came up, and protocols, workflows, there's a lot there. So I think one thing that I did want to mention that we're thinking about is having the group sort of be a coordinating function within RDA, but also having this external focus to other groups and other initiatives. We kind of think that we might need a community manager to manage that relationship. If anyone has thoughts about that as a mechanism, or if anyone is interested in that role or has someone in mind who would be great at that, please let us know, because I think the external groups who are maybe not everyone there is a member of RDA, they won't necessarily come to the plenaries, right? So I think some of the work of this IG will be happening, well, like a lot of groups outside the plenaries, and we might want to have webinars or meetings or something like that that is outside of the regular RDA meetings, and we'll use the regular meetings to discuss among ourselves what we're doing with it within this organization. So I think that's it by way of summary. Thank you all so much, everyone here and online, for a wonderful session with a lot of really good information. And you'll hear from us our kind of summary and next steps moving forward.
Just a quick question.
Quick question.
Start a working group. What is the process?
If you wanted to start a working group, contact one of us or talk to us like right now after. Yes, the question was if someone wanted to start a working group,
Yeah, if
what's
we
the
want
process?
to have a working group on assessment, say, and incentives. How does one go about that?
So I think RDA has a process, right? So I mean, talk to us about that, and then
We
I
have
think
to have a BOF first, and
Yes.
okay.
exactly BOF, charter,
But maybe
or
if there's
case statement.
if there's a research assessment group or Amy.
Amy has her hand up. Amy knows everything. There we go. Yes.
If you are an interest group who is interested in fostering a working group, say, I do not believe that you need to go through the whole BOF first. So it's
okay.
a slightly shorter pathway there because obviously you already have a community. It's the interest group. So slightly easier.
Okay, fantastic. Right. So if it's a working group underneath the or within the IG, then process would be easier, maybe smoother. We'll figure that all out, but we want to first know from you that you want to do it. So that's great. Okay. Thank you all very much.